Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Dr. Jason Jones back with another episode of Health Made Easy. And today I've got a bonus episode for you this week. And I have a very special guest. It's Miss Mary Tate. She's the owner of Tree of Life Health Coaching. She serves families of children with ADHD and other coexisting conditions. Her passion was fueled by her son, who struggled with many of these problems. And Mary's hope is to show, moms and other family members how they are not alone and that there is power in nutrition and alternative methods. Essentially, her goal is to help families of children with ADHD go from being overwhelmed and anxious to feeling completely capable of helping their child work through their challenges so that they feel in control. So enjoy this episode with Miss Mary Tate. Welcome back to Health Made Easy. This is Dr. Jason Jones, your host, and I am super excited for our guest today, Miss Mary Tate. We're going to learn a lot about her and a lot about the families and children that she takes care of. So, Mary, I'm excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Jones. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today because as I was looking through the things that you take care of, I was thinking like, man, I'm probably all of those things. So I think I'm going to learn a lot about me today. But this show is not about me. It's about you, and it's about the value that you bring to other people and how we can transform lives through podcasting and through the awesome work that you do. So our listeners may or may not be familiar with you, and certainly may or may not be familiar with the type of work that you do. So could you give us a bit of a sort of snapshot on your background, kind of who you are as a person, who you are as a professional? How did you get to doing the things that you're doing now?
Sure, I'd love to. Well, first of all, I am a wife of 23 years, mom to 3 children. I have 2 boys, 21 and 16, and 1 girl, 13. We also have 2 dogs and a cat, so we have a rounded out family here. We live out in the Denver metro area, so Denver, Colorado. And I love to spend my time going for walks with my husband and fur babies and cooking new recipes, studying the Bible, and we like to watch America's Got Talent and The Voice. Those are our 2 favorite shows. when we are able to sit down and take a break. As a professional, I'm a certified health coach, and I specialize in working with families of children who have ADHD, sensory processing disorder, OCD or ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder.
Okay.
I work with them on a simplified nutrition plan, family lifestyle strategies, and on nourishing themselves as they nourish their family.
Gotcha. So that sounds awesome. So where did you do your certified health coach training? What program did you go do?
I'm certified through the Dr. Sears Wellness Institute, which is actually based here out in Colorado.
Wow. Awesome. Yeah. Excellent program. So let me ask you this. When it comes to dealing with, because that's a big amount of, I would say, conditions, if we could say that, or labels that you work with. Why did you choose a more integrative approach? And then can you describe kind of what that approach looks like, when a child or a family kind of first comes in and what that process, looks like? And I know every family is different, but just sort of the basics of that.
Right. Okay, sure. I was drawn to working with these families as my son, who is now 21, was diagnosed at 1 year of age with sensory processing disorder and failure to thrive. And we went through several years of feeding therapy and occupational therapy and physical therapy to try to get him to a place where he was successful and thriving. We always knew there was another piece. As a mom, I just felt like there was something else going on. And one of the things I always tell my families is go with your gut. because as a mom or a dad, you know your child the best, and you're advocating for them. So just keep going. And we were he was later diagnosed at around 7 years of age with ADHD and eventually oppositional defiant disorder as a teenager. Now, the OCD came in as I struggled at 15 years of age with severe OCD, where I was basically living in one room with my parents and really struggled to even graduate high school. So there was a lot going on with me and my brother as well, who had severe OCD. So that's why I was drawn to these families. Because we were one of them. And I knew after becoming certified the power of nutrition and alternative things that I could help them.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you have a massive personal connection just right off the bat with your clients that you work with, because you've been there,
Correct.
And you've done it. When you look at the things that you provide for those families and the children in those families, what have you seen as the main things that kind of move the needle in terms of results? And when you look at when they come in to where the changes that you do see, tell me some of the things that you see. So what helps them the best, and then what are the results when you do that with them?
Sure. Well, one of the things we first do is I have them fill out a child questionnaire because I want to get to know the family from the time that this child was born, as so many of Matthew's struggles, I believe, occurred as a product of traumatic birth experience. He had a traumatic birth experience, and there is hereditary involved with ADHD and these disorders as well. So we also have that as well with some family background. So I always start off with a questionnaire. And then we start and we talk about, we meet and decide the best course of action. So I want to first hear what the parents want to concentrate on. And then, of course, I'll give what my recommendations are. So say they have a child with sensory processing and he's an extremely picky eater and doesn't want to eat and is failure to thrive like my son was. Then I take them through basically a 10-step process that I've developed, which has got proven techniques for helping this child to accept more foods into their diet. So I work one-on-one with the family, and we go at the pace that they're comfortable with. So there's never any pressure, but we do want to see results. So I'm there to coach them. That's my job, is to coach them through these 10 steps to help them achieve the results that they would like to achieve with their child.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think that you brought up a great point with coaching them through, and I think that's where there's a bit of a misunderstanding when people think about health coaches. Like, the health coach is really there as the person who has the knowledge, has the steps, has the things, but it really is the family that has to come together as a unit to implement those things to really be able to make those changes with the
Correct.
child. And
Correct.
what are like some of the, I guess, struggles that these families will face, whether it's ADHD, and you can break them each down if you want. Like,
Sure.
But where do they kind of like have that tough spot, and then how do you help them through it?
Well, of course, with ADHD, what I usually find is a lot of the kiddos are struggling in school. That's the first indication that a lot of these families realize that something's not right. With our family, it was a little bit different because Matthew was diagnosed early on with sensory processing, and then I always felt there was a missing piece. As I did my research and as I became certified, I realized that there is a component with ADHD that many of these disorders and others as well coexist with ADHD. So when I meet with a family, they'll come to me and they'll say, my child's not focusing, they're unable to sit still, they don't like school. And then when we dig a little bit deeper, I'll ask them about some sensory things. Well, what's going on with them as far as, do tags bother them? Do seams bother them? And they look at me like I'm a little bit crazy. I'm like, and they're like, how did you know? Tags bother them. They hate tags. They don't like this kind of clothing. Are they picky eaters? Yes. Okay. Now we're seeing a little bit of a pattern here, that it might not just be ADHD, that it could be some sensory things going on as well, where the things in the classroom are too overwhelming for them. There's too much noise. That's one of the reasons why they can't sit still, because the sensory system is having problems, taking all that input in. And then, of course, as they get older is where you see a lot of the ODD things come in. Some kids are younger that struggle with that as well. But once again, it's a coexisting condition that happens with ADHD. So and of course, anxiety is in there as well. These kids struggle with anxiety because, let's face it, they're not in control of their bodies. And they're being asked to do all these things they can't do. And of course, they're going to have anxiety. So that's a big component as well. So many of them have eating issues due to sensory problems. Many of them are very disorganized, not able to sit still. And that's when I see the indications, usually at school. And then from there is when we start talking about, we get a little bit more into what's going on as far as their diet. And then I start picking apart their diet and saying, let's do a food journal. I want to know what this child is eating, and I want you to log how they're feeling with that. So say Valentine's Day, for example, with all the candy and the parties and all that, it's, fun for some kids, but most children do not do well with the things that are in, dyes and artificial sweeteners. And when we talk about, oh yeah, the kids get ramped up for sugar, yes, sugar is a big component, but so are dyes. And artificial dyes, artificial sweeteners, any of that stuff is a really hard thing for kids with ADHD.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I've been very familiar with things like food sensitivities, food allergies for a long time, and I think that many of us struggle with sensitivities. Like, we don't have these big, massive reactions, but when we continually consume things that are not working in our favor, that over time, we really struggle with these things, So I think that's huge to do that. I wanted to circle back to something that you said earlier, because you were talking about your son with the traumatic birth. When you say traumatic birth, was that like a forceps kind of a thing, or a vacuum extraction, or?
Yeah, we went through 22, 23 hours of labor and figured out that he was pushing with the wrong side part of his head.
Yeah.
And they came in and said, we need to do a vacuum extraction. And he, was extracted, and after all of that. And then this is back before, I knew a lot about integrative care, any of that. So I was just going the traditional route, and then he was vacuum extracted. He had hematomas on his head, really bad hematomas on his head, and he really struggled in a lot of ways after that, expelling anything. They had to go in and vacuum him out, and his lungs and things of that nature. So I just can't imagine any of what he went through, to not have had some kind of an, problem with him. And when we went to several doctors, they'd ask me, well, did he have a traumatic birth experience? And I'm like, yes, he did. So that's where I don't have proof. It's just mom instinct kind of thing.
Yeah,
but I think he did have a hard time.
Yeah, so. I think you're spot on. Because I know for me, as a practicing chiropractor, the spine and the nervous system are so important. And I think people don't realize that the birth process, the way that it's set up and done, is counterintuitive to the way it's naturally done. So like most animals, they'll have babies, like they lay on their side, they'll squat down, they'll get on all fours, but they put a mom on her back,
Right.
totally locks the pelvis up so it can't open up, and then the baby has to go downhill, then has to come uphill. Or you'll have what I genuinely consider the most traumatic birth of all, which is like a C-section, and it just has a massive impact, especially on like the upper part of the neck of a child. And the difference between a child and an adult is the child's brain, or a baby and an adult, is that the brainstem drops down to around the middle part of the neck, and then as we get older, we grow, it goes up into the skull. So there's such an opportunity to disrupt that with kids, and I think that's where, and this is not a plug, for chiropractic in general, but it's just something that we see so often, but we don't think about it in those terms, because we think of, it's like chiropractors work on back pain and neck pain or something like that. But we see a lot of little kids, a lot of babies, and
I believe it.
Yeah, I think a lot of them have, I think traumatic births. We think about like what you had, which was extremely traumatic, and then I think you have those ones that are probably a little bit more subtle, that have these long-lasting effects later on down the road, which might be able to be nipped in the bud, with some care. So I'm glad that I circled back, and I'm certainly sorry that happened. I wanted to ask you this, not ask you this, but just can you touch on, I think sometimes when people think about ADHD and things like that, they do kind of poo-poo it in a sense of, maybe not being as real of a diagnosis as it really could be, but obviously it is. But can you touch on that, and then also touch on the fact that when they can't focus and they can't sit still, this is not like an intelligence problem, correct?
No, not at all. Their struggle really also comes from the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which doesn't get fully developed until they're in their mid-20s. Now, my son is 21, but he was also developmentally delayed. So that being said, he is a little bit behind on as far as the brain as well, because we would also notice when we took him in for his dental checkups, they're like, well, yeah, he's not getting his certain molars, and he's this and he's that. But he was definitely a little bit developmentally delayed. So he can, as far as his brain will grow probably into his 30s, just because of that. But their prefrontal cortex does not really get fully developed until mid-20s. So that being said, that's a big part of it, as far as these kids who really struggle with attention, and there's definitely neurological proof. If you look at the brain of a child with ADHD, diagnosed with ADHD, and not diagnosed with ADHD, there's certain matter that is it's just different. The way it lights up, the way it engages than a neurotypical child without any things going on. So, and it varies. It varies from one child to another, right? There might be one child that just can't sit still or is just inattentive. Girls really, when they're diagnosed with ADHD, are really often not hyperactive. What we see more is that they daydream and are more of that inattentive ADHD. Because there's three different levels of ADHD. There's ADHD hyperactivity, there's ADHD inattentive, which used to be called ADD, so now it's just called ADHD inattentive. And then there's combination. So you find girls really struggle with just daydreaming, just kind of, they're mostly not hyperactive. So it varies from child to child and even from boy to girl.
Gotcha. And that does make a lot of sense, and I really appreciate you putting those subtle signs that come up with that in general. So when we look at really serving and really helping these families. I could not recommend more a person, that has a child like that, or even an adult with it, to work with a professional like yourself. I just think I think it just moves the results like at a more of a light year type pace, as opposed to just struggling for a long time trying to figure it out on their own and reading the 125 books they're going to have to read to learn what they got to learn, where you could just like drop it on them like very easily. But if you had to give the listeners a maybe like your top 1, 2, or 3 like simple and easy tips for making a change, and certainly if they suspect these things are happening with their children or with themselves, what would be those like top 1 or 2, 3 things or 3 things they should look at?
The first thing would be keep a food journal and write down what your child's eating and then how they react after that. So, for example, if your child likes a certain cereal, make sure that you're writing it down and then see how they react, and then label read. So see what's in that cereal. And if you're working, like I said, with a professional, they'll be able to pinpoint right away, what's going on as far as like, oh, there's something in there, because we're knowledgeable to label read. We have all that, those skills. But label reading is so important. And then getting rid of things that have the artificial dyes, the artificial sweeteners. Get rid of it with those things that are full of sugar, because sugar is not a good thing for any of us, and a child with ADHD really struggles to process any of that. So that's the first thing I say is diet is huge. Diet is huge, and gut health is huge as well, and that takes a little bit longer to get into, but that's the first thing. Second thing, as far as if anyone is struggling with like a healthy bedtime routine, children with ADHD need structure and they need their sleep, because if they don't have that, they can't function the next day. So having a structured time to no screen time, 1 hour to 2 hours before bed, and taking a magnesium and lavender bath at night, and reading and diffusing some calming essential oils, just to help them get into a routine where they know that this is bedtime, and helping them get into that. It does take time. However, structure is one of the things kids with ADHD need, and they really thrive on structure, for sure. And then the last thing I'd have to say is to have them get plenty of exercise in some kind of a sport, like either would be, a sport that they love, investigate that. Martial arts is really good for kids who struggle with ADHD, because it increases the dopamine naturally, which in turn will help them with focus, because that's part of the situation is the dopamine. They don't make enough dopamine and serotonin in their brains. So that helps get it there naturally.
I love that. I think that's...
So those would be my top 3.
Gotcha. I love that. And quite frankly, I think those are a top 3 for just about anybody. I love the bedtime routine. I love the routine, because I think as adults, we struggle with very similar things, but we because we are adults, we compensate, with like coffee and, and stimulants and all these other kinds of things. Whereas like if we had a routine of like, okay, we're telling our body, this is the time we go down, because, people ask me, they're just like, hey, you want to go hang out and go, you and your wife, and we'll go out to dinner and we'll stay out all night and whatever. And I'm like, no. I'm like 8:30, 9 o'clock. This body shuts down. It's just it knows it's time to get horizontal. You know what I mean? I think that's huge. You know what? And you did bring up something that I think is so important, and does get a lot of airplay. And that's the gut health. So I know that we could spend an entire podcast, seven of them, on gut health alone. But I guess my big question for you is, all of these folks are going to need that, most likely because the diet is not going to be that great, so the gut's going to be compromised. When you look at, what do people need to know about, one, how gut health impacts these conditions, but at the same time, like realistically healing that gut, what kind of time frame are they looking at too? Because I think that's an important thing that people need to know.
Yes, I agree. As far as gut health, 90% of our neurotransmitters are made in the gut, which no one really knew until recently, right? I mean, it's there. People knew it, but it hasn't been really widespread knowledge. But 90% of the neurotransmitters are made in your gut. So if you don't have a healthy gut, you don't have a healthy brain. The gut is also called the second brain. People might have often heard of that. And that being said, there's a nerve called the vagus nerve, which I'm sure you know all about this, doctor, that travels, and that's how you get your neurotransmitters up to your brain. That being said, it's important to get probiotic-rich foods to help heal the gut. One of the things that you have to be super careful of is, you'll hear a lot of times, have some yogurt, right? The problem with that is that there's so much sugar in these yogurts that you're not getting any benefit. So if you are going to feed your child a yogurt, you need to make sure that it is a plain yogurt, and then it has the good probiotics that at least 7 to 10 different probiotics your body needs to build that gut health up. So look for an organic brand that's plain, that just has, the different probiotic strains in it. And then you can add a little bit of fruit, like a little bit of, blueberries or strawberries that are, natural fruit in it to sweeten it. You don't want to fill them up with sugar, because that's not going to help their gut health at all. And it does take time to build up the gut health, depending on what you're using as well. There's many good supplements that they can take, children's supplements for probiotics as well. And it really all depends on how the situation is as far as the commitment of the family to change the diet. Because if you're not changing the diet, even if you're doing these probiotics, it's not going to help in the length of time that you're wanting it to see results.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes total sense. With that. And then you stack on top of that. What if they're sensitive to dairy? Then it's like double trouble.
Right.
It's like sugar and dairy. It's like two things that they shouldn't have, and then bam. And then we wonder why they aren't coming around or getting there. So
very true. So gluten-free, dairy-free, all that kind of stuff needs to be taken into consideration as well, depending on each situation is different.
For sure, and I think I think that's an important thing for families to understand, is like it's a it doesn't have to be, but it can be at times a pretty massive commitment, to make changes, and you really have got to be willing to make those changes and stick it out, because it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but it's necessary to be able to do that.
Well, and I also tell them there's no quick fix. You are doing something naturally. There is no quick fix. It does take time. You will see changes. Be committed, and this is overall for health of a lifetime, not just a quick fix that's going to get them, focused and sitting in school. You want them healthy for a lifetime.
Absolutely, and I agree. It's like, even if it took, 6 months, a year, 18 months, 2 years, over the course of a lifetime, that's nothing. It's a drop. It's a drop in the bucket for sure. So when we look at do you have, or is there any resource that you would recommend that folks could check out? Maybe something they need to read, maybe something they need to look at to learn more on this topic.
Sure. One of the things that really helped me, this book is amazing. It's called The Out of Sync Child. And it's by Carol Kranowitz. And it really helps families to see the whole sensory processing disorder and how it all interacts with all these other things. Because what you think might be one thing might be totally something else. And she does incorporate ADHD in there as well. So the Out of Sync Child was an amazing resource for me. And it's a pretty old book right now. I mean, it was back when my child was, so it's probably like 20 years old. I'm sure she has revisions as well. But it's an amazing book. I can't say enough about that book.
That sounds awesome. Yeah, and that sounds like, kind of before all these different diagnoses codes were there. It's had a good solid resource. So I think equally important, if not maybe even more important for that parent or family who is listening to this and they're just like, yes, 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 all those things, those all make total sense. That describes me, that describes my child. How can our listeners best connect with you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, there's several ways. My website is treeoflifehealthcoaching.net, because that's my business name, Tree of Life Health Coaching. And then they can reach me on Facebook, Mary Tate. And I also have a Facebook business page, Tree of Life Health Coaching. And they can message me there as well.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, Mary, this has been an eye-opener for me because I certainly have been aware of these things, but definitely not to the degree and to the depth that we went into it today. And I just can't thank you enough for not only coming on the podcast, but for taking the challenges that life has given you and your family and turning that into a way to serve people in a bigger and better way to ultimately change their lives. So thank you so much for coming on. I just really appreciate it, and this has been really great.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, my pleasure.